Hello and welcome to another episode of Useless Information. My name is Darryl Woods down here in the lower left-hand corner, and I work in adult services at Hollywood St. Paul's. And today we are going to be talking about vocations and the topic of the most dangerous jobs in America. So I'm only going to be talking about jobs that have a significant number of people working in them. Lion tamer, for instance, is probably a very dangerous job, but the number of people working in it is so limited that those numbers could vary wildly from year to year based on whether they're having a good year or not. Each of these slides is going to show a fatality rate, a two-digit number. This is in proportion to 100,000 full-time workers. So if you see a fatality rate of 20, that means that 20 out of 100,000 people died in a single year, which is 0.02 of a percentage. The national average across all industries is only 3.5, so that is really good. Most of the jobs that are listed here in this top 10 are performed outdoors by people without college degrees, and many of the people only get very little on-the-job training. So all of these are things that lead to these higher fatality, higher injury rates. And I'm also going to be sharing with you, because I noticed through this top 10, as I was compiling this list, that a lot of these are jobs that were worked by my father, Phil Woods, who's currently in his mid-80s. And once again, a lot of jobs that he worked were outdoors. He didn't have a college degree. Didn't get a lot of on-the-job training, but thankfully he has survived all that. Like I said, he's in his mid-80s now, and he's still trucking along. Okay, number 10, grounds maintenance. So the risks involved in this job are transportation, just simply moving from one location to another, the possibility of getting into accidents that way. Equipment. They're working with very large equipment, sometimes very dangerous equipment like chainsaws. And falls. Obviously, if you are in a tree or on a roof and you fall, those could have a lot more severe consequences than if you were just standing on the sidewalk, for instance. So the fatality rate is 21. Remember, that's out of 100,000 full-time workers. This is something that my dad liked to do occasionally for fun. Sometimes he would just go out on a weekend and he would decide he was going to trim a tree. And we always felt sorry for those trees afterwards, because he would trim the heck out of them, and then they would get really distressed, and then they would just go poof. All their little limbs would just come shooting out at once. Yeah, but it was something I'm assuming he enjoyed doing. Number 9 is construction or extraction. Extraction is working in a mine, pulling stuff out of the earth. The risks here are transportation, falls, slips, and trips, because you're dealing with, a lot of kind of dangerous things could be lying on the ground in the case of construction work. So if you fall or slip or trip, you might possibly impale yourself or something like that. Dealing once again with big equipment, dangerous equipment, and because most construction workers work outdoors, you have the weather risks as well of dealing with inclement weather, lightning strikes, for instance, severe cold, for instance. Fatality rate here is also 21. This my father did for most of his adult life. He worked in the construction industry, and once again, didn't get a lot of on-the-job training, but he rose above it and quickly became foreman, and then quickly became a manager of a construction company, and like I said, did that for most of his life. Number 8 is structural iron or steel workers. So the risks involved here are falls, obviously, as you can see from this picture. If you were to fall from a distance like that, your chances of surviving aren't probably very good. And boy, just looking at this picture makes me a little anxious, I guess, a little nervous. So I would never be caught dead in that situation. And dealing with, once again, a lot of dangerous equipment, sometimes big equipment like cranes, dangerous equipment like blow torches, welding machines. There's also a risk from objects like collapsing walls or electric wiring that isn't installed properly. Also, as you can see here, weather can also be an issue. That inclement weather we were talking about with construction workers being out in the severe cold, or obviously in a situation like this, if a lightning storm was to pass through, this person would be essentially standing on a lightning rod. Number 7, farmers and agricultural workers. The risks here are transportation, going from town to the barn to home and things like that. Dealing with large animals that could crush or trample you. Heavy machinery like threshers, rakes and balers, brush hogs. Dealing with dangerous chemicals like herbicides, pesticides, ammonia. Once again, working outside a lot, so you've got inclement weather that you have to be careful of. And we haven't talked about this issue yet. Farmers obviously work in rather remote locations, so if something goes wrong, things have a greater chance of going bad and getting even worse before they can get the help or the treatment that they might need. So all of this equals up to a fatality rating of 24.7. This was what my father did. He grew up on a farm. So this was his childhood, having daily chores where he was working outside with large animals, with heavy machinery, with chemicals, etc. All right, next. Number 6, driver. Transportation, obviously, is going to be a risk. And let's skip down to the bottom of the slide here. It says that transportation accidents are the leading cause of workplace fatalities across all industries. So the number one cause of fatality across all industries, all jobs, is due to transportation issues. Weather, obviously, if you've ever driven, you know that bad weather can cause worse road conditions. So the fatality rate here is 26, and these drivers are always among the leaders in total fatalities and total injuries. My dad did this for a while. He was an over-road truck driver, thankfully for just a couple years. All right, moving on. Sanitation workers. Here the risks are obviously transportation. Those sanitation workers are always on the road and dealing with heavy machinery. I would not want to imagine what might happen if somebody actually accidentally ended up in the back of one of those garbage trucks. Falls, trips, or slips, especially due to weather, could be definitely hazardous. Notice that the fatality rate here is 37, which is more than 10 times the national average. Number 4 is roofers. The risks are falls, trips, and slips because, once again, if you're high up on a 7-story building working on the roof, your consequences will be a lot greater than if you're standing on the sidewalk. Working outdoors, inclement weather with the snow and rain and freezing conditions, things like that, make it even more dangerous. Here the fatality rate is 51.5. Fortunately, my father only worked at this job for a little bit of time. Number 3 is aircraft pilots and flight engineers. And this might be one that is considered a little surprising, considering it doesn't really quite fit in with the rest of the professions that we've seen so far. Obviously, the risk here is transportation. Something going wrong with the actual plane and it descending at a rapid rate. The fatality rate here is 58.9, but here we're really not talking too much about, a pilot who works for Delta, for example. We're talking about people who mostly work in the private sector. So think more like Kobe's helicopter pilot. So in this case, high risk equals high reward because the median average wage is 3 times the national average. So here, if you're working a dangerous job, at least you're getting paid in compensation for doing that dangerous job. Most of the others on this list, not so much. Number 2, Fishers and related occupations. If you have ever seen the world's most dangerous catch, you know what I'm talking about going into this. We've got risks of drowning, transportation, falls, slips, and trips. You have to deal with a wet deck every single day. Remote conditions. If something goes wrong and you're out in the middle of the ocean, what are the chances you're going to get to a hospital in the time that you need? Severe weather, once again. And we've got a fatality rate of 77.4, which is more than 20 times the national average. Before we get to number one, let's talk about some of these that came close but didn't quite make the list. So we got underwater welder, an oil field worker, veterinarian. We don't have bull rider on here, but obviously people working in the rodeos. That's one, it is a legitimate profession which has a lot of people working in it, and two, obviously very dangerous. We don't have a picture for them, but people who work in law enforcement, police officers, sheriffs, very dangerous. Power line workers, bus and truck mechanics, and electricians, all just outside the top 10. So what is the number one most dangerous job in America? It is a logger. So not only are they working with heavy equipment, dangerous equipment like chainsaws and harvesters, there's a very good chance that they could be struck by a falling object, a tree limb, or perhaps an entire tree being felled upon them. Very remote locations, maybe not as remote as being out in the middle of the ocean, but a lot of times they are still very, very far away from the closest hospital or doctor. Once again, working in inclement weather, where they've got a chance of, especially if you're up in a tree, being struck by lightning or something like that. The fatality rate here is 97.6. That's almost 30 times higher than the national average, making it the most dangerous job. Now, my father didn't work as a logger for very long, but this is something, I told you he liked to trim trees. He loved going out and getting wood on the weekend. We had a wood stove in our house growing up, and boy, he wanted to make sure we were using that as much as possible. So on the weekends, we would go out and get wood. And if you don't think that was dangerous, if you ever see me and you want to hear some crazy Phil Wood stories dealing with logging, just come up and ask me. And yeah, a couple of these stories might really blow your mind when you find out just how crazy my dad could be sometimes. Okay. So I got this information from these sources that you see here, and I want to send a shout out to Maya, who does such a wonderful job of creating these slides and picking out the images that you see. I've said it before, I probably would not continue doing this without her help. But this has been useless information, and if you would like to leave a question, comment, or suggestion, you can just do so down below in the comments, or you can email them directly to me. And so until next time, thank you very much.